Hello, Fuse Factory. I'm going to be demoing two different instruments today, and they're both custom builds and run on Arduino. And let's get this started. This is Tony. This is the first thing I'm going to be demoing. It's in a little box, a little acrylic box here. It is running Arduino and has arcade button, big masher up front, and a little rotary encoder here in the back, and a nice big nasty switch, this kind of style switch for power, and it's got power in and 1/8 inch audio out. So essentially you just you plug it in and turn it on and it makes noise. It's using, for anybody who's done Arduino stuff, it's using the tone library but also a software timer to generate a tone, and it's in the key of E because it's Tony. So, but it's a little ugly. It's a square wave generator. So let me turn this thing on, and then in fact I want to choose where I put the encoder, because when you turn it on, that's going to be the bass. It's going to be the tonic. It's going to be E. And as I roll this encoder, I'm going to be able to go through the scale. It plays a major scale. And every time you get back to the same place, it's another octave. So if I point the encoder down like that, then that's always going to be the start of the octave for me. It's going to make it a little easier. So I'm going to turn that on. Nice solid square wave. Right? Now, the encoder is also a button. So if I push the encoder, then I switch it to the, so that's using the built-in Arduino tone function, for anybody who's done that, where you just say tone and it uses the hardware to generate a square wave at the tone, and you can ask for a certain frequency. The scale mapping and kind of musical part of it is done with the software framework that I've been working on for maybe 3 years now, that is running both of these instruments. I'll talk about that a little bit. But the tone you're hearing is being generated by the tone function, and if I push this encoder, it's going to use a software timer to try to do the same thing, which is a little uglier usually. It's decent at low frequencies. It actually goes a lot lower than the tone function. Little fun side here is the tone function doesn't go as low as you want it to. As low as I want it to. It just glitches out. That's the tone function down below that note. When you use a software timer, there is no bottom end, because it's just spacing itself out to give you the note you asked for, a really low E. But this one starts to get bad as you get higher, because the software timer can't keep up in the same way that the hardware timer can. That's not great. But if I switch back to the hardware timer, the tone function, we can handle that note just fine. Now the fun thing is that Tony also lets you combine these things. So an odd little side effect function is that if you're holding the arcade button, which is allowing me to play the notes, right? If I hold this down while I switch modes, then it keeps playing the note in whatever mode it was in. And so you can mix these two modes and get some pretty ugly square wave synth. Enough. It's kind of obnoxious, but I like that about it, actually. It has custom electronics inside. It's got essentially a proto board and an Arduino Nano, which you can sort of see through the foggy window. My sweaty hand has fogged it all up. But I soldered all the connections down, and it's got a little Arduino Nano that I can tear out of there if something were to go wrong with it. It does have its own built-in speaker, and one of the fun things that I did was if I unplug the audio, then it's just coming out of the, there it is, it's on the back. So it does allow you to just kind of plug in and jam with it, except it doesn't have batteries. So you do still have to plug it in to power, whatever. But it does switch the audio source. So if you plug in an external audio source, then this speaker no longer makes sound. It just comes out of the line out. So that was fun for me to figure that out. All right, so that's the first kind of attempt at making a scale mapping instrument, and I did it with the internal tone function because it's easy, it's straightforward, it's just there waiting for you. And that other one, because I happen to be into software timers, I just decided to put those things against each other and create this little noisemaker. Next up is this one here. This is Kendrick, and this is a little bit more complex. It is it's got more knobs. It has 2 rotary encoders. It also has 2 optical encoders, and the rotary encoders are like the one on Tony are very inexpensive ones off of Amazon. Maybe I can show you here. So that tiny little chip is an encoder. I think you buy a pack of 10 for $10 or something. They're around $1 something each, maybe. They're cheap. Both of those are rotary encoders. This is what, incidentally, is in a wide range of devices. Like I have a metronome here in the studio, and it's got a little knob on the front, and I can feel that it is essentially exactly that. It clicks, and it no, this one doesn't click. A lot of them do, though, right? They click, and you can feel the click as you move it around. So those cheap little things are great. These, on the other hand, you can kind of see the little bars here. This is an optical encoder, and so this is using a reflectance sensor, which is inside here, looking at this disk, and the spacing lets the optical encoder do what's called quadrature encoding. All of these do quadrature, but this is fun stuff to play with because you can laser cut or otherwise fabricate an encoder of whatever size you want. You got to follow some rules in terms of matching up to your sensor, but you can make some really big goofy knobs that are physically very stable, make a nice interface. These little things they're so small that even a knob this big is getting kind of awkward. These can handle a knob really of any size. So this is a much more physical instrument. It's my second attempt, essentially. This one's also MIDI. So instead of putting out audio the way Tony does, this puts out MIDI, and then that MIDI is fed into some kind of synthesizer. You could use something simple, like a little battery-powered synth that accepts MIDI. I happen to have it plugged into my computer, and it's running through my DAW. I'm using Reaper, and I have a bunch of VST instruments that are going to let me create a nicer sound. can see as soon as I start moving Kendrick, it responds by playing notes. Now, Kendrick's interface is in 4 pieces. As I said, sending out MIDI to my DAW here, so that's handling the synth. And what I have control over is these 4 parameters. So I've got the most obvious one here. This is the scale position. This gives you 1 full rotation. Will cover 4 octaves. And that position is sliding, so you can decide where the bottom and the top are and change that as you want. So I can swing it around like this as many times as I want because I'm going down. I'm just figuring out where the bottom is. This is going to be the bottom now. 4 octaves all the way around to there. If I swing the knob up. Now for my angled desk here, I know this knob is going to end up here anyway, downhill. So maybe I'll make this the top now. Right, so 1 full rotation, 4 octaves, so I get a full octave in a quarter turn here. Off a little bit. And you can hear it's playing a major triad. Right. We'll get to that in a minute. So this is my scale position, which sets the note that Kendrick wants to play. I don't control the notes directly. Kendrick does. Kendrick has an internal clock, a little metronome, that allows it to decide when to play notes. And you can also affect the subdivisions. We'll get to that. But it's deciding when to play the notes. I'm putting the thing in a certain position and sort of asking for a certain kind of activity. But it is a collaborative instrument, and I'm not directly in control of when it plays. So it's kind of like an auto harp, maybe. Sometimes people say theremin. I think theremin is a terrible comparison because, well, it just isn't. Maybe an auto harp would be a better comparison. But Kendrick is deciding when to play the notes, and there's a lot more adjustment to it than something like an auto harp. So scale position is here. The next knob I want to play with is this one over here. This affects the tonic, the root, which currently, I think it's an E. Let's find out. Tony's an E. No. Is that it? No. Yeah, there we go. Any. And the reason I had to search for it is because this sets the tonic root, and it's in the same arrangement as a circle of fifths. So if you turn it clockwise, you go a fourth up, and if you turn it counterclockwise, you go a fourth down. Right. So if I'm in E and I turn it to the right, then I should go to A. Right. There's E, and if I go the other way, I should get to B. You can hear you kind of like a 1-4-5 thing going on. Now, you got 2 other parameters that we haven't even talked about yet. So you got this thing as a circle of fifths. If you move in adjacent steps like that, you'll tend to get your 1-4-5, but you can also leap to a totally different spot and kind of come up with some fun accidental relationships. And because they're related by fourths and fifths, they tend to resolve in ways that are, sometimes interesting. The next knob to talk about is this size here. Like the third one, I guess, yeah. This one controls what kind of chord or scale Kendrick is trying to play. So it's a major triad is again, this one has a bottom, and I can turn it forever and figure out where the bottom is, but I'm going to put the bottom straight down because that makes sense to me. And then I can walk through the different kinds of scales. So major triad. I think next up is minor. So you can kind of go major, minor there. Major, minor, then I don't remember. I had to look. I need a chart. Sounds like diminished. No, that's diminished. Is it major? Major seventh, maybe? Oh, no, it's a triad. It wouldn't be. And now we're back to major, but this whole set, so there's like a set of triads, then there's a set of seventh chords. So these are sevenths, and this would be a major. Sounds like a major seventh chord. Then probably dominant would be next. No, that's dominant. That's minor, and that's probably diminished. Sounds diminished, which means next should be. No, that's diminished. Fuck, man. This is where I really wanted to get. That's Aeolian, or Ionian. Sorry. This is now we're in the modes. Now we're in the diatonic modes. So this is a major scale, like do re mi, Ionian, right? It's going to go through the modes. Again, I need a chart. Because we're going to do the triads, then we do all the seventh chords, then we have all 7 diatonic modes, and then we have like other scales. So this is do re mi. Right. Let's try changing this tonic again. A standard major scale going on. And of course, if you whip these things around a lot, you'll kind of get randomness. Like I said, there are some other scales here. We've also got on the other back end here, things like whole tone. See if I can find it. I think it says. Yeah, right. And right past that, I think, is octatonic. And now we're in an old episode of Batman. That's always a fun scale. Might be better to have it on something like in here also is like there's pentatonic, it does chromatic. Every scale I could think of that made sense at least. This last knob, by the way, is beat subdivision. It's not the tempo. Kendrick's locked into a single tempo, which unfortunately right now is I think it's 30 or something. It's really slow. So if I crank this all the way down, yeah, it feels like 30. right? So it's only going to play a note every other second. If I click this 1 to the right, it's going to chop it in half. Now I get a note. This should be 60. Click it again, I get a triplet subdivision, but across 30 means, yeah, right, it's a dumb subdivision. Again, that should be 120. Right, twice a second. So it goes, it starts at that, whatever the base tempo is, and then it divides it. First 1, then 2, then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to 8. Which is why that tempo should be based on a more, I think it'd be better if it was 60 probably. Because then at least you could, on a second click, get 120, and then your triplets would be based on 60, right? Which would be a little bit more convenient probably. But it goes all the way up to, I think it's like 32 subdivisions. So if you crank it all the way up to the other end. And again, these knobs are really physical. One of the things I really like about these optical encoders and wooden parts is that these things move really nicely. Again, not like these. These are, you can spin them, but they're these little kind of crappy encoders. I wouldn't want to beat on them too much. This is fine. This is all made of wood. There's no electronics in the operation of this. There's a little optical sensor looking at it, but this can really take a beating. Then you can find some beat subdivision in the middle somewhere. Changes that this provides. It creates little moments. There's runs or kind of like resolutions that I wouldn't naturally come up with if I was playing on any regular instrument. But they are kind of fleeting, so it's sometimes it's hard to get back to what you've got. Part of the goal for me was to create an interface that was complicated enough that would let you come up with new accidental things, but straightforward enough that you could get it to do something right out. There's some decent academic research about the sweet spot for a good interface, and it does seem to be a relationship there where if the thing is too easy, it's not really possible to have any depth of experience. This would categorize things like a lot of toy instruments, like a kazoo, right? You don't go to see a professional kazoo concert. And on the other end of that spectrum for me would be something like the violin. You do go to see a professional play a violin, and you pay money for that. And kind of by contrast to the kazoo, you can't just pick up a violin and make it sound beautiful, right? It's not totally straightforward. So the difficulty of the interface is not it's not just sort of a barrier to entry. It also it does seem to have an effect on the way artists are able to explore the interface, and you need a sufficient amount of difficulty, but not too much, and kind of like that. So in designing this, I wanted to provide enough inputs, but also have them make sense in some way, because if they're too goofy, you kind of can just get lost. Right. So now that I've got this, I've got Kendrick up and running, and explain the whole interface here. The next fun thing to do would be to try to maybe like lay down a little bit of drums or something and play over the top of that, and show you that it's capable of that. Because it is playing on a metronome, and I know that it's 30, and that can be subdivided to 60 or 120. And because it also does triplets, it does other weird things. As long as I keep my DAW over here, I'll keep that on 120 and use the metronome. Then I can lay down some drums, and then they'll relate, sorta. Let's go. Let's see what happens. And just quickly here, I've got a wireless keyboard, which is going to control my DAW. It's allowed me to rewind, record, and save tracks. And then I'll come back to Kendrick here in a minute. Maybe something like that. I'll try to grab 8 or 12 out of the middle of that and put them in a loop. Let me turn this other way. Alright, I think that's going to loop okay. Now, I got to try to find the right subdivision here. And I guess I'll turn off the metronome. There we go. There's a lot of steps, you know. Something like that, right? Resolution's a little hard. It's kind of a harsh stop, but I think you get the idea, which is that it is possible for it to be synced up, but it's not. You know, Kendrick isn't reading off the MIDI clock, and it doesn't lock in that kind of way. You can't. If you were running a synth that accepts a MIDI clock, it does send a MIDI clock. So if you have something like this little box here, this little Korg, does accept a MIDI clock, and so it's possible to sync it up so that the arpeggiation on this kind of matches up with this. But from my experience and kind of part of the point of the design is that it's exploratory, and so it's I think it's better to just kind of find a tempo, try to lock this thing in. It doesn't always happen immediately, but once you play with it for more than 5 minutes, you start to find these little grooves where you're locked in. And so if everybody's on the same page, you know, Kendrick's perfectly capable of playing along well with others. But it is a very different kind of instrument, and it's not it's not so literal. You have to be willing to kind of explore and find your sweet spots. But once you do, as you can see, I'm able to find a kind of phrase I like working with, step away from it, come back to it, actually have it land on something that feels like the beat. Yeah. So both Kendrick and its a little friend here, Tony, are running a software framework called the Powder of Life. And that is not something I can demo right now, but it is it's a stack of software you run on your Arduino board, and it will allow you to connect up things like these encoder wheels, which are kind of hard to work with from a software perspective. Once you fire Powder of Life, then these things just come in as like a 0 to 1 essentially, and then it also is providing the MIDI output stuff. It knows how to talk MIDI. Arduino board kind of knows how to do that anyway, but the Powder of Life handles that communication, and Powder of Life is also handling the scale mapping, so that I can take a 0 to 1 input and map it to like an octave range or a circle of fifths, something like that. So it's a whole kind of like a toolkit, and you can get to it from my website. There's a GitHub page. You can download it. It's very poorly documented, but it does work, and you're welcome to reach out to me and find out more if you're interested about that. But yeah, so I essentially wrote a big stack of software, and then once it got working, I went ahead and built these 2 instruments out of it, and they're up and running. There you have it. Thanks for watching.